Welcome back to our special programming on GES 2017. Impact investing is no longer niche but is becoming more and more mainstream, with investors actually looking at opportunities that will help solve India's biggest crisis in terms of sanitation, agriculture, health and education. Which is why Saina Denugra of CNBC TV18 caught up with two of the biggest impact investors in the country, Thomas Hyland of Espada and Vineet Rai of Avishkar. Let's listen into that exclusive conversation.
Welcome to this special presentation from the Global Entrepreneurship Summit 2017 in Hyderabad. We are going to be talking now about impact investing and social enterprises with Thomas Hyland of Espada and Vineet Rai of Avishkar. So let's begin by talking about some of the broad numbers, right? So the NASSCOM startup report that actually got published a couple of weeks ago indicated that there's been a large uptick in the number of social enterprises that was set up over the last year. As people who've been running Avishkar now, Vineet, for over a decade, much more than that, 16 years, and Thomas, you've been doing Espada for the last 8 years now. So what has changed actually in the last year and a half, if I may ask you that?
I think there are 3-4 things which have changed. First, you actually had good people trying to change the world. Now people are actually trying to build hardcore businesses. I think one of the biggest change that we are actually trying to make today is bringing in those people who want to build a business and then create a story about change around that. So instead of change being the input, change is the output. And that essentially brings us very close to what mainstream business is doing. And if you look at what GES says, transforming business, transforming society is a good business, that's essentially what impact investing is doing now.
All right. What is the change, Thomas, in the kind of startups that are approaching you now for raising funds, even within the social venture space? What are the sectors that people are looking at? Or is there fundamentally also a change in the kind of businesses that they want to build?
One of the things that's been heartening is we've seen a whole crop of younger entrepreneurs start to come into the sectors which we've traditionally focused on around health, education, at the last mile, and especially agriculture. Agriculture has traditionally been a difficult sector to invest in and largely focused on supply chain and very heavy assets. But we're seeing young, very well-educated, technologically savvy teams actually start to tackle many of the challenges in agriculture.
Vineet, what's the experience been as far as agriculture is concerned? Now actually the buzzword is agri-tech. No one is just calling it agriculture anymore. But tell us, you've worked in the field for a very, very long time. Your own entrepreneurial journey, if I may call it so, started in the agri or forestry space. So tell us about what's changing now.
See, I think financial space is actually now reasonably well established in the impact space. So the next big space which appears to be taking or capturing people's imagination, and again, success actually comes from two sides. When you can actually have impact being followed by mainstream. And agri is one space that is essentially defining the same feature that finance defined. For two reasons. One, it is a very, very scalable space. Second, there are actually significant amount of institutions that exist that can provide you talent like it happened in finance. So in my view, the kind of agriculture, you're talking about agri-tech, we were probably one of the first investors in agri-tech through AgroStar, which has scaled up, and IDG and Axel have followed through. We need to create this bridge. That's essentially our role. If we can find an entrepreneur, we can create a scalable story, connect it with mainstream investors, you have an opportunity to build $1 billion company and make massive impact. And that's essentially what we are trying to do. And agriculture offers all the good points, and that's why it's getting the kind of celebrity status that you think.
All right. So you brought up 2 points, Vineet, that I want to go into. One, you spoke of making these ventures mainstream. So for our viewers, kind of explain to us what are the things that you look at, and Thomas, you can come in here as well, from an impact investor point of view, at an early stage when you guys actually do invest in funds. And then what do you look to do to those businesses to actually make them investable by the IDGs and the Axels and the Sequoias of the world?
See, I think there is a misconception about impact investment. One of the big misconceptions is that impact is the input or changing the life is an input. I think changing a life is an output and what can be measured. So impact investors measure. One, we claim that we will make a difference and then we measure it. but that does not absolve us from the duty of generating commercial returns. So one we look at the quality of entrepreneur, like any venture capital do, but what uniquely we do, which a mainstream fund will find it very difficult to do, is we specialize and understand the low-income markets much better than anybody else. And therefore, we have the courage and conviction to go in very difficult businesses that a commercial entity would find it very difficult to go. So for example, I'll give you some examples. Both Thomas and I are invested in a company called INI Farms, a company that actually would have never been invested by a mainstream venture capital investor.
What does INI do?
INI actually is used to first grow pomegranates, then actually export them, and now actually does bananas and pineapples as well. So it's actually producing and selling. Similarly, I have a company called Ergos, where we went into Samastipur in Bihar, and we are creating micro-warehousing and then commodity sales. So these are the kind of businesses that you have to start. Now, who would go from Mumbai or Bangalore to Samastipur to start a company? That's the impact investor role. But once we will create a 100 crore company there, a lot of capital will flow, like Milk Mantra, like HR Foods, these companies that we went in, created the risk in Orissa and Jharkhand, and then mainstream capital starts following. So taking the risk, extraordinary risk, going into very difficult spaces, either in the space or sector, or actually creating the opportunity, that's essentially the critical difference between an impact investor and a mainstream investor.
All right. For you, Thomas, what would you see as a big differentiator, adding on to the points that Vineet's already made?
That's absolutely right. And I think our role really is to play a de-risking role as a capital provider. You know, if you look at the kinds of things we've invested in, and we talked about agriculture, many of the larger mainstream commercial VC funds simply won't go in that sector where the check size is, let's say, less than 30 crores, right? Our role is really to go early, prove out the unit economics, try to de-risk, help build out the rest of the CXO suite, put in place governance, reporting mechanisms, and really equip that company to be able to raise the next stage of follow-on capital. And the commercial markets are incredibly important for us, right? Because if you actually look at where most impact funds are set up, they are set up as early stage investment vehicles. Right. And so we need those who Vineet mentioned, Excel, Sequoia, Matrix, others, to come in for later stage rounds to take our companies to much larger scale.
All right. So we spoke about the guys that need to come in to follow up your investments, but let's talk about your own LPs, right? Vineet, you've completed your first close of the Bharat Fund, $95 million. That's, I know, minuscule when you look at the $500 million that you already manage at Avishkar. So tell us about closing this particular, the first close for this fund.
Yeah, I mean, people tell you that if you are on your sixth fund, life will be easy, but I can tell you, especially in India, raising a sixth fund has been probably my most challenging experience. It took me 2 years, so it's not been easy. I think that key differentiations or changes have been that I realized India is no more considered a developing country. Even though very large swaths of our country still are developing, the world doesn't see it that way. So the DFI is a development finance institution that actually essentially typify my investors have started moving to Africa and other places. So India was no more the dominating demand for them. That actually is the biggest challenge, which essentially meant that midway through my fundraise, I had to completely rechange my fundraising strategy and started focusing on India as the capital provider. My entire track record has been that I have raised money from abroad, 95%, 98%, 2% from India. This fund, $95 million, 50% from India.
All right. And what is the makeup of the kind of people who've put in money here?
So it's actually the fund of funds by the government of India. So SIDBI was there, NABARD was there, and then actually we have some very large number of family offices, like Mr. Munjal, Sunil Munjal himself personally put in $15-16 million. That's significant by any stretch of imagination, both Indian and abroad. I have never seen an individual actually coming forth and forking out 100 crore. I was able to also actually attract a lot of other investors as well, who were able to participate and put in between $3 million to $5 million as individuals. And I think that trend will continue. I'm also hoping the insurance companies, which are flush with funds now, would start participating significantly.
What's holding them back?
Well, I think there is a learning gap. A lot of people don't want to pay fees. A lot of people actually do not understand risk. It's a learning gap, and I think as their understanding of the spaces where they can deploy goes up, the chances are that a large amount of institutional capital that is available in India will flow into impact.
Thomas, at Espada, you have the likes of the George Soros family office that has invested into your fund, and so many others. Talk to us about that experience. Are you looking to actively raise another fund? Tell us about the makeup of that. What would it be like? And are you looking to raise out of India now, given that Vineet's had a 50% close from Indian family offices?
Well, Vineet has been a real, bellwether in being able to raise from domestic capital because it's not easy. And in fact, many of the discussions we have in the impact space are from more international funders. We have an interesting structure, actually. We have a first fund, which is a collaboration between, as you mentioned, George Soros' Economic Development Fund, the Omidyar Network, and Google, which was set up as a fund. And our current structure in Aspada is actually a holding company, entirely backed by Mr. Soros' Economic Development Fund. What that means in the holding company structure is that we act like a fund, but we don't have a fund life. So many of the challenges most investors face with regard to timing your exits and being able to redeploy capital, we don't face that. And so we can invest for the longer haul, which presents its own sets of challenges when you try to take that structure to a more traditional LP.
What would be the quantum of that fund? I believe you already have about $100 million under management.
Correct.
What would the new fund be to the tune of?
So the new fund will be north of $150 million. And part of the reason we want to raise that quantum of money is it allows us to continue to do what we're doing. I think one of the challenges always happens when you raise too large a quantum is that you get pushed into much larger deal sizes, right? For us, our sweet spot, I think similar to Vineet's, is to be able to go early, identify fantastic entrepreneurs, work with them, continue to invest up to, let's say, 40, 50 crores of our own money, but be able to play in that space.
So keep it with CNBC TV18, and thanks for watching.